Vayikra is mainly about karbanos, so the psukim have so many details, and the Mishnah put everything in order, that the karbanos are divided into two categories, like kochim and kalim. If you read the psukim carefully, the psukim delineate the differences between them. Kochim, you have to do shchitas matzafon. People don't learn the klishares, but if you do the shchita with the kabbalas adam not in soften, the korban will be possible. Kochim kam shchitas makam ba'azar. And then there's another difference that the zman is more limited. Kochim, the zman is limited to yom v'layla. The kochim kalim basically is shnei yom v'layla echad. That's shlomin. The Rambam writes in the Hakdama to the Pirush HaMishnah to kochim, that basically there's one kochim kalim, that's shlomin. And all the others are branches, subcategories of the shlomin. We don't know exactly where the Rambam got it from. The Gemara says that toida is a subcategory of shlomin. That says l'chom mizebach toida shlomav. The Gemara has dinner based on that. But where did the Rambam get that Chor Ma'aser Pesach is also subcategories? I don't know. But basically shlomin is nechol shnei yamim v'layla echad. And the others are not. Chor Ma'aser Pesach is not, but that's what the Rambam says, that the subcategories of the Shlom. So the Zman, the more Mekudesh it is, so the more limited the Zman is that you can eat it. The more limited the Mokam is. Kochim have to be eaten, Zichri Kuhuna in the Azorim. Kochim Kalim can be eaten by any Jewish person who's Tahor, anywhere in Yerushalayim. Then the din of Me'ilah is in this week's Seder. Someone is Nenem and Ha'egdish has to pay. Kermacham should bring Asham Me'ilah. There were 6 Hashamas. Asham Me'ilah is one of the 6. So that's only Nenem Kochi Hashem. Kochi Hashem is Kochim HaMiyuchadim Hashem, only Kochim. Kochim Kalim is only Me'ilah on the Emurim, Lachaz Rikas Adam, because the Mishnah says the Emurim of a Kochim Kalim have the status of a Kochim. If you take the Emurim Chutz Lazar, it's Nipsal B'Yotzei, like Kochim. So that's why Emurim have a din, even Emurim of Kochim Kalim have a din of Kochim. That's why there's a din of Me'ilah on it. So there are many differences between Kochim and Kochim Kalim. Other differences between Kochim Yochid and Kochim Karbonis Sibur. Karbonis Yochid says that there's smicha. The Bala Korban has to do smicha on the Korban. Korban Sibur, you can't have smicha. Who's going to do smicha? The whole Klal Yisrael is going to do smicha. So the Mishnah lists off, there are, I forgot about it, Mishnah has, I think, 3 or 4. How many Karbanos Tzibur are there that are exceptions to the rule that they do have smicha? Parshas Davashal Tzibur is one of them, that it has smicha. Some of the members of the Bez Nagadol do smicha on the Parhal and Davashal Tzibur as representing the smicha. And Yom Kippur also, Kain Gadol says vidu. Usually a person did it up there, he says vidu. I don't say vidu for someone else. Each person has to say vidu for himself. So Kain Gadol on Yom Kippur says vidu on behalf of all of Klal Yisrael. So he does smicha on the Korbanos, also on behalf of Klal. So these are very few exceptions to the rule regarding smicha. The parsha begins Dabel B'nei Yisrael. Usually B'nai Yisrael either means V'lo B'nos Yisrael, or it excludes Gerim. B'nai Yisrael V'lo Gerim. Like in Parshas Schachter, it says Dabel B'nai Yisrael. So there's a machlokes Satanaim in the Mishnah where they're Mashke Mishagiyoris. It doesn't mean Agiyoris. It means Mrs. Ger. If a husband is a Ger, the whole institution of Schachter is a miracle. That if she's innocent, an iksav in Israel Zara, there's nothing poisonous about the Maim HaMaim. It's bitter. Bitter doesn't cause you to get sick or to die. So the Torah promises a mitzvah l'doros when you have we don't have a Beis Hamikdash today. Torah promises a mitzvah l'doros that if she's guilty, she'll get sick. She'll start to get sick right away from drinking the Maim HaMaim, and ultimately she'll die. And if she's innocent, even if all the years she was married, she wasn't able to have children, a miracle will occur, promised a miracle, and she'll have children. So that's a machlokes hatanan, whether that miracle was promised even if the husband is a ger. Whether mashkamas hagior, geros means Mrs. Ger, If the husband is a ger, that's a machlokes whether he can mashke his wife, because it says Bnei Yisrael. So Bnei Yisrael v'lo geram, Bnei Yisrael v'lo isha. Here he says Bnei Yisrael v'lo benos Yisrael. What do you mean v'lo benos Yisrael? A woman can't bring a korban oila. No, a woman can bring a korban oila, but she doesn't do smicha. Not allowed to do smicha, because smicha, even though it says samach yodo in the singular, but the Mishnah says you do smicha b'shtei yadayim. That's a problem with the Targum Yonasan ben Azil. We know Targum Yonasan ben Azil is not Yonasan ben Azil. Say he made a Targum on Novi, he didn't make a Targum on Chumash. So they say that the Rosh Tevis Taf Yud is a mistake. It doesn't mean Targum Yonasan, it means Targum Yerushalmi. There's another Targum Yerushalmi. There are two versions of Targum Yerushalmi, but it's not by Yonasan ben Azil. Yonasan ben Azil was a Tana. So so they're not sure. There are a lot of strange things in Targum Yonasan ben Azil that carry opinions of the Karaim. So some say it was written by Karaim. It wasn't at all from the Tanoim. And those who say that it is a traditional Targum, so they have to write Svarim for all the Kashas. Every chapter there's another Targum Yonasan ben Azil that's against the tradition. So there are a lot of Svarim written to defend the Targum Yonasan. The Targum Yonasan says on the Pasuk, Samach Yoda, the right hand, do smicha with the right hand. It's against the Mishnah. So they say, well, if it's written by a Tana, so the Tana has a right to disagree with the Mishnah. But we know it wasn't written by Yonasan ben Azil. That we know for sure. So it's a problem. So that's what the Tanaim say. Women don't have the mitzvah of doing smicha. Are they allowed to volunteer? Let's say a woman wants to volunteer to shake a lulav. So the Gemara has a machlokes hatanaim from the Sifra whether nashim samchas v'shus, is it permissible for a woman to volunteer to do smicha? What's the machlokes? So Rashi learns on the Gemara, is it permissible for a woman to volunteer to shake a lulav, or to listen to Tkiyah Shofar, or to sleep in Sukkah? Is it permissible to volunteer? Is there such a thing as Zeina Mitzvah V'Yosa, or is that a violation of Bal Tosif? So by us it's a double pasha. The women do shake a lulav when they say a bracha. They even say a bracha. The women sleep in the sukkah. The women do mitzvah says Shaz Maglam. Rashi learned that was the machlokes. They said there is no such machlokes. There never was a machlokes like that. So what is the machlokes? So the Ravid and the Pirush on Torah's Karanim, it's really by the Ravid, by the real Ravid. There's a Pirush that's miyuchas to the Ravid on Maseches Tamid. So that everybody assumed that that was not written by the famous Ravid. It was a Rishon who lived the days of the Rishon, but it's not by the Ravid. It has a lot of things that contradict what the Ravid writes in other places. But the Ravid on the Torah's Kahanim is really the Ravid. So the Ravid on the Torah's Kahanim has a different. The Ravid was from southern France, from Provence. So they had different girses in the Gemara. A lot of times they had different traditions. So the Ravid has a different girsa. Machlokes hatanaim is a woman permitted to volunteer to do smicha nashim samchas rishus, because when you do the smicha, you have to put your both hands on the samach yoda rosh ha'oila, both hands, and to lean on the animal in such a way that if they'll take away the animal, you'll fall down. So that's a din that should have normally been an Isser Mishtamesh, the Kotchim. You're leaning on the carpet. It's not called Me'ilah. Me'ilah is if you get Hanoah, but it's a different. A Sava b'chor sherecha, but a Soga is b'chor tzeinecha. B'chor is a Kotchim Kalim. There's no, the Gemara, the Mishnah says, the Mishnah is and Me'ilah say, there's no din of Me'ilah on Kotchim Kalim. So that's a big machlokes in the Rishon. What does that mean? Me'ilah, there's an Isser Me'ilah, and then there's a penalty of Me'ilah. So the Mishnah says, Mishnah and Me'ilah have a whole list of things that are loinenim v'loy mo'elim. L'chatchili, you're not allowed to get hanoah from it. It's also b'Me'ilah, but the Eved, you don't have to bring a korban Me'ilah. So almost all of them, loinenim v'loy mo'elim, maybe all of them, are all midirabbanan loinenim. In our Torah, it's not hegdush at all. So loinenim midirabbanan v'loy mo'elim in our Torah. By Kotchim Kalim, it's a big machlokes of Rishonim. The Rashba and Kiddushin in the second parak quotes the big machlokes whether loinenim is only midirabbanan min haTorah by Kotchim Kalim. There isn't even an Isser Me'ilah or no. Loinenim is min haTorah. but there's lo mo'elim, there's no me'ilah. So even though Rab Soloveitchik said he heard from his grandfather Rab Chaim that that's inconceivable, that it should be the Isa Me'ilah should only be the Rabbanon, not Kodesh Mikal. Inconceivable, but it's a machlokes of Rishayim. So half of the Rishayim did conceive of it. Rab Chaim held that it's inconceivable. Okay. So the pasuk says Lasaba b'chor is Kodesh Mikal. That says Lasaba b'chor sharecha v'lasagas b'chor tzanecha. That's what the Gemara calls Giza b'avodah. You're not allowed to do Giza b'avodah. So avodah is not the same as me'ilah. Me'ilah means I get benefit. I'm nenem in a hegder. Avodah means I use the behema. I lean on the behema. I'm sormich b'chol koichi. So whenever you do me'ilah, it's a mitzvah. Whenever a man does me'ilah, it should have been a violation of the din of avodah b'kodshim, but that's the din that you do it. So that's the shaila. If a woman is not mechuyev to do me'ilah, she wants to volunteer, she's allowed to volunteer it even though there's an Isser involved? Or no? You're not allowed to volunteer. Let's say a woman wants to volunteer to put on tzitzis, and the tzitzis has shatnez in it. So they write it in the Pirush and Teras said it'll be the same machlokes Satanaim. A woman is allowed to volunteer to do a mitzvah that she's patur from. Not like Rashi learned that's the machlokes Satanaim. A woman is allowed to volunteer to sit in sukkah, that's not a problem. But she should volunteer to wear tzitzis with shatnez. That'll be the same machlokes as she's allowed to volunteer to do smicha on the korbanos. The way we have the gears in the Gemara, nobody holds like that. Nashim samchas v'shus, the way we have the gears is that akufa yedaichu, they have their hands float on top. They don't lean on the animal. There's no heter for the isha. They're not mechuyev, so there's no heter to lean on the animal. The whole machlokes is she's allowed to do imitation smicha. What's a shayla imitation? Imitation smicha is a fake. There's no, she's not doing b'chol kocha, so she's not yotze the mitzvah. Not yotze the mitzvah at all. And she can't say a bracha, she can shon the sasum tzivon. Not being yotze the smicha. So the machlokes is, women are not allowed to do smicha b'chol kocham. Are they allowed to do imitation smicha? So what's the din? Is it permissible to do an imitation mitzvah? Let's say the Gemara says you have the only shofar in town on Rosh Hashanah is a possible shofar. The only esrog is a lemon, and you can't be yotze with a lemon. The Sava Kadisha 100 years ago, the Sava Kadisha was Sephardi Alafandri. See, he was on the Kuplan. He was big in learning, so he wrote a whole tshuva that Minat Torah. A lemon is also good. It's only a chumim with your rabbanah. The lemons are no good. Any citrus fruit is good. And I think it has been accepted. But so let's say the only esrog in town is a lemon, and it's not acceptable. So should you make a zecher lemitzvahs dalaminin kadesh alot tishtakach mitzvahs esrog? We shouldn't forget the children. Young children, they never saw a shekalula before. So this year they're not going to shekalula. They won't have any zechronis of dalad minim. So maybe kadesh alot tishtakach teras dalad minim. Maybe you have to shake a lula with the apostle esrog with the rabban. So that's a question. Are you allowed to do an imitation mitzvah in order kadesh alot tishtakach? So that's the machlokes Satanaim. So what does it depend on? Gemara said the klal is if there's what to be choshesh for takola. The Aderes put out a little sefer. It's called Zeichel Mitzvahs Hakel. When Shmuel Salant was the head of the Badatz for the Ashkenazim. In Eretz there was Sfardim living all the generation. And in the early 1800s, the Ashkenazim started to move back to Eretz Yisrael. Because both the Vilna Gaon and the Baal Shem Tov encouraged their followers they should go to Eretz Yisrael, and this will hasten the coming of Mashiach. They both agreed the same thing. So, so when the Ashkenazim came, they had to make their own bezin, because the Shchita, Hilchas Shchita is different, and the Hilchas Treifas is different. Each group, the Sfarad and Ashkenaz, each group has their own chumras and their own kulas. So the Ashkenazim made the Badatz from the Eidach HaRedis. That was, it wasn't Satmar. Eidach HaRedis was the Ashkenazim. So Shmuel Salant was an old man. He was the head of the bezin for the Ashkenazim. And so he said they better prepare someone else to take over. He's not going to live forever. He's going to have to retire. So there was a big pilpul for a few years whom they should get. Rab Chaim felt that they had enough Mora Hora in Yerushalayim, because the practice used to be that big Rabbanim from Europe who would retire would move to Eretz Yisrael and they would join the Eida Charedis. So they had a lot of Rabbanim who knew how to pass Shabbos there. They had been Rabbanim for many years. But Rab Chaim felt that they need a sharp Maggid Shir. He felt that was what was missing. So he wanted they should appoint a Bitzel Panavision. He thought that he was the strongest Maggid Shir. So he wanted, but that didn't work out. He for some reason or another. So they appointed the Aderis. It took a few years, Aderis. Aderis was Eliyahu David Rabbanovich Tomim. That was Rav Kook's father-in-law. And then his daughter, who was married to Rav Kook, passed away. And the Aderis, she passed away during the father's lifetime. She died young. And so the father of the girl recommended Rav Kook should marry her cousin. That was his niece, his brother. He had a twin brother. Their family name was Rabinowitz, and they were twins. The father-in-law of Rav Kook with his brother were twins, so the family name became Rabbinovich Ta'omim, the twin brothers. So Eliyahu David Rabbinovich Ta'omim, that's the Rosh Tevas of the Aderis. So they appointed him that Aderis should take over the Rabbanis in Yerushalayim from Rab Shmuel Salant. He came there until I think 1901 or something like that, and then he died in 1906, and Shmuel Salant was still alive. So Rabbi Chalap used to say that on the Matzeva of the Aderis, it says he was appointed to take over the Rosh. And Ismail Elias, Rabbi Rosh in Yerushalayim, but he didn't live so long. He died before Rabbi Shmuel Salant. He was the Rav of Yerushalayim, but Shmuel Salant was still there the whole time that he was the Rav. So he put out a kuntris, a small pamphlet about Zeichel HaHakel. Is it permissible to have a Zeichel HaHakel? Is it permissible? So in Eretz Yisrael they do. In Eretz Yisrael, the Rabbanut always has it by the Koslam Haravi. Every Chalamat Sukkah is following Shnas HaShmita, have a Zeichel HaHakel. So they have somebody laying from the Parshas and Chumash Dvarim that used to lay Mizban Shabbos make the Shoykan. So they used to do this before Rab Shmuel Salant, before the Medina, before comes a Medina. Now it's done by the Rabbanut, so that's why the Chazon Ish was opposed. But they did it for years before. The Malamdim used to bring the young children to the Koslam Haravi, and they used to read with the young children who were learning Chumash. They used to read with them all the Psukim, all the Parshas, that the Melech used to learn by Hakel. So that's what he wrote, a whole kuntris. When is it permissible to do an imitation mitzvah? So the Klal Gemara has is, if there's room to be choshesh for a michshol, then you're not allowed to do the imitation mitzvah. So let's say we don't recommend, on the one hand, if we don't have an esrog, so we should recommend to use a lemon and not say a bracha, in order that the children should know that there's such a thing as a mitzvah of daled minim. It could be that next year there won't be an esrog either. So we don't allow it, the Gemara said, because we're afraid of a michshol. The children will remember this year we used a lemon, and it says sun-kissed on it. So next year they'll also think you can use a lemon. It's a bad chinuch. So that's what it depends on. Whatever it is, what to be choishish about, that michshol will come out. That was a shadow with the women's prayer groups. The din in Mishnah is that 10 women don't constitute a minyan. So the women wanted to have their own women's prayer group, invitation minyan. So the shaila is it permissible to do an imitation? So it depends, is there room to be choshesh for a michshol? So the Rabbanim said, yeah, there's room to be choshesh. They'll learn kriyas haTorah and they'll say brachas. It'll be brachas without Torah. Because women don't constitute a minyan. You can't learn kriyas haTorah with brachas unless you have a minyan of 10 people. And the michshol came out already. The women make their own prayer group and they say Baruch and Kaddish and Kedusha, Chazar Sasha, everything Shalei Kedin. They do the michshol. It's not that we're guessing what's going to be. From day number one, it was wrong. So that's based on the tshuva. That's, are you allowed to do imitation mitzvah? So that's how Tosfos learns the machlokes hatanoim. Rashi learns the machlokes whether nashim samchas rishus. Is it permissible for a woman, if anyone, to volunteer a mitzvah as an ena mitzvah v'yas? Tosfos said that can't be. Everybody agreed that's permissible. That's not an isa. And the Ravid learns the shabbos whether women, whether you say they're allowed to lean b'chol koicham. That's not the girsa. We have the girsa in the Gemara in Chagiga that even according to the Tana, Nashim Samchas, we're not allowed to do b'chol koichem, because that's avodah b'kodshim. So we're left with Taisus Pshat. Taisus learns the machlokes hatanoim was that you have to be choshish when michshol, because women are going to do smicha and the korban is going to be imitation smicha. Akufa yadaycho, the hands are going to float on top of the korban. They're not going to be leaning on it b'chol koichem. So do you have to be concerned that maybe a woman will lean b'chol koichem? She'll see the men are leaning b'chol koichem, even though we'll tell the women have big signs. The women are only volunteering; they shouldn't do b'chol koichem. Maybe there's what to be choshesh from michshol. So we paskin that it should be awesome with the rabbanon because it be choshesh from michshol. But the Gemara says kedei lasas nachas ruach lenoshim. The women felt cheated. That's like the women today who can't make a minyan, so they feel a little bit cheated. So the women's lib, so they the movement, so they have their own women's prayer group. So that was the machlokes hatanim. There should have been an issa against doing imitation smicha, because someone may get carried away with himself and do smicha b'chol koichem. That'll be an issa. So, but maybe kedei lachzas nachas ruach l'nashim, maybe you're allowed to violate the rabbanans. So Rabbeinu Tam said that's how we paskin. You are permitted to violate the rabbanans because of this consideration. Kedei lachzas nachas ruach l'nashim. So that's how the Rabbeinu Tam came up with his idea that women are permitted to recite a bracha when they shake a lulav. It should be a bracha levatala. Women are not mechuyev to shake a lulav. Why are they saying a bracha? Because if you don't let them say the bracha, Rabbeinu Tam says bracha levatala is only the rabbanan. So kedei lachzas nachas ruach l'nashim, we paskin, it's permissible to violate on dinim de rabbanan. That's the Rabbeinu Tam got it based on this pshat in the Gemara. That's the machlokes where the nashim samchas v'shus. You shouldn't allow nashim to be. Shouldn't allow anyone to do smicha v'shus shema yavo lasa smicha b'chol koichem. That'll be a violation of avodah b'kodshim. But kedei lachzas nachas ruach l'nashim is a sufficient cause to allow violation of din and rabban. That's how the Rabbeinu Tam learned pshat. The Chumash has the din that chayla v'dam is supposed to be korban on the mizbeach, the dam of korbanos, not the dam of chulin. But the prohibition against eating chayla v'dam by chulin is because the chayla v'dam really belongs. It's designated for the korbanos. So that's the Rambam writes how much dam do you have to drink in order to get malchus. So the Rambam Hilchas Macholos Hasuas writes akazayis. So that's the Minchas Chinuch on today's parsha. Yes, the kasha. Why is the shir kazayis? Kazayis is for chelav. That's food, achila. But shtia is a revius. Revius is more than kazayis. Either chatzi beitza or shlish beitza. Revius is a beitza or machza, much more. So why does the Rambam say that the shir is kazayis? Rashi also says the shir by dam is kazayis. So the Minchas Chinuch thinks that the answer to the question is because it says it says loshen achila, and achila is always kazayis. So if it would have said shtia, it would have been revius, but because it's achila. So that's questionable whether that's the Minchas Chinuch is not so sure that that's the right answer. Could be another answer. The Gemara says when a woman is nursing her baby, so the milk that the baby is swallowing has a din of oichel, doesn't have a din of mashke. In order for oichel to be makabel tumah, you need Hershel. You have to rinse it off one of the zayim mashkim. So there's a Mishnah increases, and the Taisus in the end of Masech Shabbos, a big gigantic Taisus. Taisus points out, based on the Gemara increases with the Mishnah, that the milk that the baby nurses from the mother has a din of oichel. How does it have a din of oichel? You drink it. So Taisus says that the difference between oichel and mashke is not liquid versus solid, is beverage versus food. So let's say the goyim in the slaughterhouse. So a lot of the goyim in the slaughterhouse, the dam that gushes out when you Schachter behemoth, all the dam comes out from the neck, so they like to drink that, they feel that that's very healthy. By us it's an isakaris, but they enjoy it. They don't drink it because they're thirsty. It's not a beverage that tastes good. They think that it's very healthy. So they drink it like we drink soup. And the Mishnah Berurah quotes the Chayodam, how much soup they have to drink in order to say bar nefesh. He says kazayis, not a revi. It says soup is an oichel. Soup is not a mashke. So that's what the Parshas says, that the Rambam says that you have to drink a kazayis of dam, because dam is an oichel, it's not a mashke. A mashke means a beverage that people would drink when they're thirsty, to quench their thirst. So that's what there's a Pirush on Mishnayos by the Kamarne Rebbe, Chassidish Rebbe from years ago. So he writes on Mishnayos Taharis that schnapps is an oichel. Even the Russians who drink a lot of vodka, they don't drink it to quench their thirst. They drink it to relax. So then, so the Kamarne writes, it's not a mashke, it's an oichel. That's a shot. The people drink schnapps, a tiny little glass, and they say bar nefashos afterwards. So they use a tiny glass of schnapps for kiddush, but it doesn't have a revius. So the kosher Glover, who was killed by the Nazis at the end of the Warsaw Ghetto, he killed all the survivors. He was one of the survivors that he killed at the end. So he has a tshuva. He has a lot of his tshuvas are to defend minhagim that the tzibur do that are very questionable. So he says to defend the meaning that you say bar nefashos, a little glass of schnapps, it's way less than a revius. So he says schnapps is an oichel. Quotes the Kamarne and Pirush HaMishnah. Schnapps is an oichel. And the oichel the shifa bracha achrayna is kazayis. And kazayis is a machlokas with a chatzi beitza or shlish beitza. So it's a shlish beitza. So for dinim derabanan, Mogen Abraham says, how do we paskin? So Mogen Abraham says, for dinim deraisa, you have to be machmer, that it should be a kazayis is a chatzi beitza. For dinim deraisa, you have to be machmer chatzi beitza. Dinim derabanan, you can make up that it's a shlish beitza. So he says, the schnapps and the schnapp glass is the volume of a shlish beitza. So for kiddush on Shabbos morning, that's only the rabbanan, so that's acceptable. That's acceptable. To say bar nefashos, that's questionable. Say bar nefashos, that's a kula. So you shouldn't be making. You shouldn't say bar nefashos after schnapps, unless you have a chatzi beitza. Shouldn't be like a shlish beitza. But to be a kiddush on Shabbos morning, it's okay. So the quote from Rab Chaim Volozhiner said, the Chassidin made kiddush on schnapps on Shabbos morning. So Rav Moshe writes, you're not allowed to use Chamar Medina unless wine is not available. So Moshe writes, what continent do you live in? Knock on the next door neighbor's door. I have 150 bottles of wine in my house now. Everybody brings me Shalach Manas wine. He used to give me for Shalach Manas schnapps. And then I used to sell it to the next door neighbor. He used to bring me a whole carton full of schnapps. And he gave me $10 for the whole carton's worth, a few $100. He gave me $10. Then I said, whatever you don't want after the holiday, I'll buy back. He drank it all that night. Every year drank, and he died from a liver ailment because of drinking too much schnapps. He gets sick. My next door neighbor, he was a Shabbos guy. Yeah. So Chaim Volozhiner says it's not right that they use schnapps for kiddush. He says schnapps is an oichel. That's what the kosher Glover defended the minhag. Why they use so little schnapps? So he says because it's an oichel. And therefore, the shiur is kazayis. The kiddush and Shabbos morning is only the rabbanon, so you can make a shlish beitza, has a shlish beitza. So Rab Chaim Volozhiner, they quote that he says it's an oichel. He says the first prerequisite that something should be a chamar medina has to be a mashke. It can't be. I can't say kiddush of a bowl of soup. Bowl of soup is liquidy. Let's say it's clear soup, chicken soup. You can't say kiddush over soup. It's an oichel. So, Adarabba, so once you say that the schnapps is an oichel, then it's no good for kiddush. Kosher Glover defended him and he said that's an oichel, so therefore kazayah, so therefore it has kazayah. Yeah. Used to be here in the neighborhood. Rabbi Schwab was a Talmud of Rabbi Breuer in Europe before the war, and then in America, Rabbi Breuer died at the age of 98. So when he was getting old, before 98, he asked Rabbi Schwab, was in America already, he was a rabbi in Baltimore. So he asked Rabbi Schwab to come become his assistant rabbi, take over when he'll have to retire. Rabbi Breuer lived to a ripe old age of 98. Rabbi Schwab didn't have too much time to run the Rabbanis after he passed away. Rabbi Schwab took sick at the end. So Rabbi Schwab, I used to be the rabbi in the branch of Breuer's in New Jersey for a couple of years, for 5 years. I had to speak to him every year about the different shilas that came up. So he told me at the end of his life he had some kind of a thyroid problem. He was very heavy. He didn't eat. He had a thyroid problem, so he was very heavy. So he wasn't allowed to eat bread, cake, or cookies all year long, and he didn't. So, but on Pesach night, it wasn't healthy, but they wanted to fulfill the mitzvah. So on Pesach night, he would only eat one kazais. So the din is, if you only have one kazais of matzah, first eat the whole meal. He said the bar piadam on the vegetables and shahakal on the chicken, whatever he ate. Then he said bar nefoshes at the end of the meal. And then he said alachilas matzah and hamotzi and alachilas matzah at the end. He had kazais. They said the first night is deraisa, so he had a chatzi beitza of matzah. The second night of Pesach is derabanan. You have the shena shel galis. You only had a shlish beitza. A yakish measurement. That's what it said in Shulchan Aruch. You follow the Shulchan Aruch. Yeah. There's a machlokes in the Gemara in Zvachim where the dam shebishla is and he said deraisa derabbanan because dam shebishla is pasal is rika al gabi hamizbeach. The dam is only kosher if it wasn't cooked. Dam shemolcha also maliach kerasech also pasal is rika al hamizbeach. So Ashkenazim for sure paskin. The dam shebishla is only the rabbanon. Most of the Svardim it's unclear what the mechaber paskin. I think basically they also assume dam shebishla is only the rabbanon because the whole isa dam, chedu dam is because meyuchad for HaKadosh Baruch Hu by the korbanos. That's what it says in the Chumash. Dam shebishla is pasul. The zvika al gabi hamizbeach, so therefore there's no chorus. It's only the rabbanon. Same thing as, let's say, by emurim. Let's say you cook the emurim first and then you want to be makta them on this back also. It's no good. It's not called reach nichoyach. It has to smell like burning raw fat. If you cooked it first, then it's possible. Yeah, who pays? Difference between korban yochel and korban tzibur. One difference is smicha. The Mishnah says korban tzibur don't have smicha, just 3 or 4 exceptions to the rule. The Mishnah says which they are. And then another difference is who pays for the korban. So the korban yochel, I have to pay for the korban. There's a pasuk that the Gemara Nazar learns out from the pasuk that there's such an institution as Magdash al Menashe's kappa bo chaveiro. That's I know my next door neighbor was Machal Shabbos b'shoigig. He has to bring her korban chatas and he can't afford. Chatas cost a fortune of money. So let's say the neighbors feel bad for him. So they send money to the Beis HaMikdash and they say, please send a letter to my next door neighbor. Don't tell him it's me. Say that the korban has been paid for and he has to agree in advance. Korban is paid for by friends of his and he doesn't, if he wants to, he should tell the Gizbar that he accepts it and they'll be makar with the korban on his behalf. So that's called Magdish Amanashis Kappa Bo Chaveiro. I can donate the korban. I can be Magdish the Chatas or the Ola. Let's say the next door neighbor took a net, he's going to bring an Oila or Shlomen, and he can't afford it. So if the neighbors are Magdish the korban on behalf of their friend, so it's also good. That's a pasuk. But by korban sibur, you can't have a family donate. They're going to hang up a sign that basically all the korban sibur were taken care of this year by the Goldstein family. Sure. So during the Baisheni period, that was a common practice because the Tzedukim didn't follow the Torah Shabbat Peh. So they used to do everything Shaloi Kedin. So they would auction off the schus, which family is going to pay for all the korbanos. But they said they hang up a sign. All the korbanos were paid for by this family from Montreal or whatever, the family from Tel Aviv. So that's Keneged Adin. So when the Chachamim, during the Baisheni period, when they kicked out, there were many years that the Tzdukim were running the Beis HaMikdash. The Chachamim, they were running the Sanhedrin also. They were passing everything Shaloi Kedin. So when the Chachamim succeeded in kicking out the Tzdukim, they made a yontif. So that's he took him to Midah. When the Korban Tabin was established properly, that you can't have a private family donate. It has to be the Machzah Shekel money. So then they made a yontif. One of the Karbonis in the Sedra is Hashem Toli. What is Hashem? There are 6 Hashems. Hashem Toli is what it says Chatos. If a person doesn't have their b'shogeg, he has to bring the Chatos. What did they do b'shogeg? He ate pasa b'chol b'shogeg. He cheated in business b'shogeg. No, only if he spoke lashon hara b'shogeg. Only if he violated an avisa, that if he would have done it b'mezid, it would have been kores. And if he does it b'shogeg, it's chayv Chatos. 100 years ago, there was a Malamed who was a very good Malamed. So he put out a book, tips on how to be a successful Rebbe for young children. So he writes, when you teach Haschalas Chumash to little children, you're not mechuyev to teach them every Rashi. Rashi quotes the whole Torah Shabbal Peh. So you just have to give Pshuto Shon because he gives a mashal, and he writes, Korban Chatas. So if you didn't have their b'shegim, not mechuyev to say over the Rashi that it's only if you did an aver b'shogeg, which if you would have done it b'mezid, you would have been chayiv koris. So davar shazana koris should go sachatas. Rab Chaim, they sent Rab Chaim a copy of the sefer. Rab Chaim sent them back a letter. They printed the letter that he agrees with him that the Malama doesn't have to teach every Rashi, but that Rashi, that's pshuto shal mikra. The children shouldn't have a mistaken notion that whenever you do any aver b'shogeg, you have to bring a chat. That's wrong. That Rashi you should teach. Other Rashis is Torah Shabbat Peh. So what's the din if a person has a suffix, if he violated an Isa Koris b'shogeg? He ate in a restaurant, a kosher restaurant, and after he ate, they gave him a steak. It tasted delicious. After he eats it up, so let's say the chef in the kitchen says, "Oi, we made a mistake. We forgot to cut out the chalev from one of the animals." And somebody, so they look around, everybody ate all the steaks. They were all eaten up. So somebody there in the restaurant, they ate chalev, they don't know who. So all the people who were included in the suffix have to bring an Asham Toli. If they would have done Bavada that they were a lucky winner, they ate the chalev, then they have to bring a chatas. The cosmon that there's a suffix, you can't bring a chatas if you're not sure. It's not Bob Ben Adam and the Doli, you have to have a dias hachet for sure. So they have to bring an Asham Toli. And if later on they come to the realization that they did eat the chalev, then they have to bring a chatas. Once they'll know, they have to bring a chatas. So the Rambam has an opinion that suffix deraisa l'chumra is only midirabbanan. That din itself is only midirabbanan. The Shev Shmaitzer starts off with that machlekes Rishonim. Most of the Rishonim disagree with the Rambam. The Rabbi happens to agree with the Rambam on that. Rabbi usually disagrees with all the problematic Rambam. So here the Rabbi agrees with the Rambam. The Sveika deraisa l'chumra is only midirabbanan, and Atar it's really l'kula. So that's what the Kes Mishnah raises the question: how can Sveika deraisa l'chumra be midirabbanan? There's an institution of Hashem Tolui. If you have a suffix, if it's chalev, then I tell you you're allowed to eat it. Mutter had to go to eat it. How can you tell me I have to bring on Hashem Tolui if I'm not sure? If it's mutter l'chatchila. So we have in the Rambam in Hilchos Tumas Ochlin, we have 3 lines in brackets. Kes Mishnah said that some manuscripts of the Rambam had these lines, so the printer put it in brackets. How can you ever have an Asham that the Rambam asked the Kasha on himself? How can you have an institution of an Asham Talui if Sveika deraisa l'chumra is only with the Rabbanan? So he's allowed to eat the suffix chalev. So they had the Negirsa and the Rambam, suffix deraisa l'chumra is only with the Rabbanan by Isurei Lavin, but by Isurei Kores, that's an Isur Heftzah. An Isur Lav is only an Isur Gabab, an Isur Kores is an Isur Heftzah. So there, the Rambam agrees that Sveika deraisa l'chumra is midiraisa. So that's problematic because the Rambam says Sveika deraisa l'chumra is only midirabanan. He says by Arayas all have kores, and by Shabbos. Shabbos is kores. So the Kes Mishnah defends the Girsa, and he thinks Arais means grusha l'koyim. It doesn't mean grusha l'koyim. Arais means chavi krisis. Yehareg bal yava doesn't apply to grusha l'koyim. Amon l'kain gadol, mamzeres l'Yisrael. Not all Yisurai Bia are called Arai, only Yisurai Koris are called. And Shabbos is Koris. It says, when the Rambam says, Safek deraisa l'kulam, and deraisa by Shabbos, it means Tchumen. Shabbos means Tchumen. The first thing that comes to mind is the Lama Tesman. How can it be? So the Parshas says that's not correct. So what's the teretz on the kasha? So the Achronim all say the teretz is, there's a machlokes hatanaim. What do you do when there's a conflict between the kri and the ksiv? Do you follow the kri? And there's a shayla halach l'maisa. Do you follow the ksiv or do you follow the kri? So that's machlokes whether yeshem la'mikra or yeshem la'masar. So one of the more famous cases is Hashem Tavli, because the pasuk that v'asa achas become mitzvah Hashem asher lo se'asena v'yashema. I think it's at the end. You know? In the Vayikra. Lo yada ocean. So the word we call mitzvos Hashem should really be spelled with two vavs, because it's a mitzvah is mem tzadik vav hey. You want to make a plural, so you put another vav. It's not true though. You don't. We spell in an Israeli newspaper. They don't put nekudas, so they would write mitzvahs mem tzadik vav vav tav. Like Moshe, Aaron, they'll spell Aaron hey, Aleph hey, Reish vav nun, because they don't put nekudas. So they put in vavs a lot. They put in extra letters. I put in yuds a lot of time, but that's not the correct spelling on mitzvahs. So we don't really understand. A lot of the Gemaras by Yeshem Amikra we don't really understand. So the Gemara says mikol mitzvos Hashem. The ksiv is mitzvahs, and the kri is mitzvos. So do you follow the ksiv or do you follow the kri? So that's machlokes Yeshem la'mikra. So what's the difference of the whether you follow the ksiv or the kri? So the shaila is that you have to have chaticha achas mishtei chatichas. We know for sure that there was chaylev here. The men in the kitchen, in the restaurant, a kosher restaurant, the people who work in the kitchen say they forgot to cut out the chaylev from one of the pieces of meat that they served. So somebody ate chaylev, but we don't. For sure, someone ate chaylev. There is chaylev here. We don't know whether you ate the chaylev or you ate the shuman. We're not sure. So whenever it's chaticha achas mishtei chatichas, that's what we call ikva yisura. That's a more serious suffix. So that's what the Rambam says. That's the only time the Chayav Hashem told is ikva yisura. So that's Vayikra deraisa l'chumer. But any suffix where it's not ikva yisura, then the Rambam's opinion, even by yisura kores, that Vayikra deraisa l'chumer is only midirabban. That's usually assumed to be the answer. So one of Chacham Avadia's children printed a couple of years ago, printed a tshuva, why he's so mekel, why Chacham Avadia is so mekel. He says, because they hold that only, like the Rambam, Vayikra deraisa l'chumer is only midirabbanan. So the whole shot is only midirabbanan. And even in Koris, it's only Vayikra deraisa l'chumer midiraisa if it's a ikva yisura. So Vayikra, you're just dealing with a din derabbanan to begin with, so you can be mekel. Pretty strange attitude. I never heard of such a thing. What's the story beside the karbanos are divided into two categories. Some are kachim kachim, some are kachim kalim. There's a korban shlomim that is sometimes kachim kachim, sometimes kachim kalim. Zivchei shalmei tzibur are kachim kachim. On Shavuos, once a year, when you bring the musafim, so you bring shalmei tzibur. Kipsei atzeres is shalmei tzibur. Shalmei tzibur is kachim kachim, and shalmei yochid is kachim kalim. It's a quirk. The same korban. If it's a korban yochid, it's a korban kachim kachim, kachim kalim. If it's a korban tzibur, the musaf on Shavuos, it's a kachim kachim. On today's sedra, the word Vayikra is spelled with a little aleph, and Sefer Divrei Hayamim begins with a big aleph. Adam, Shei, Senish, Kenim, Halalo. List off the first 10 generations. So the Adam there has a big aleph. So they quote from the first Lubavitcher Rebbe when he was a child. He said the Torah, how come there's a small aleph over here and how come over there there's a big aleph? Because Adam Rishon sinned because of a gaiva. He realized he was Yitzir Kappa Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He wasn't born from a father and a mother. He was created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He was created by directly by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So he had a big aleph. He was a little too sure of himself. So that's why he sinned with the Eitz Hadas. But Moshe Rabbeinu was humble. That's what the Mefarshim say. How come it has a little aleph? The Medrash says, Hechon Zacha Moshe lekarnei hoid. Moshe Rabbeinu came down from Har Sinai the second time around, so his face was shining. Karnei hoid. Michelangelo thought that it meant horns. Karnayim, horns. So that's why in his statue of Moses he has horns. But it doesn't, Karnei hoid does mean, it means his face was shining. It was shining like horns, but it didn't have any horns. So the Medrash has a so it says Medioshan Ishtar Bekumas. What do you mean Medioshan Ishtar Bekumas? Usually say Parshas, a person is a super genius, so he wrote 100 books. They're Talmidei Chachamim. They write, they print, and everybody reads everything. Say everything that they write and everything they print. There are thousands of shurim they say, and all the time they write, they still have within them a lot of greatness. They can't express everything, can't give everything over. So Moshe Rabbeinu had so much greatness within him, that was the Yoshin Ishtar B'Kumas. He couldn't write everything. It's impossible for any genius to write everything that he has to offer. So they say that's why Moshe Rabbeinu wrote, so that's one pshat, Yoshin Ishtar B'Kumas. Means every genius has too much within him, and it shines without. And others say no. The Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the small aleph because by Bilam it says Vayikra Elokim al Bilam. It was B'mikra, Loshen Kari, Loshen Tumna. So Bilam's nevuah was Loshen Kari, and Moshe Rabbeinu was Vayikra. But he wrote a small aleph out of humility. It should sound as if Vayikra, as if he was like Bilam, as if he was a lower level. A funny pshat. Moshe Rabbeinu decided to write small letters, big letters on his own. Whatever the Rosh Hashanah told him to write, he wrote. I don't think this is correct. I think the Balatur maybe said, we shouldn't say this pshat. The Yoshin Ishtar B'Kumas means that he wrote a small aleph out of his humility. He didn't want everybody to know that it had Lashon Chibur. They should think that he had the same level of Nebuah as Bilam. So that's what the Balatanya said when he was a young child. That the little aleph represents the humility of Moshe Rabbeinu, and the big aleph in the beginning of the Rayamim represents the arrogance of Adam Rishon, that he was Yitzir Kappa Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu and went to his head, so that's why he sinned. There's a sefer that has the Shari Ephraim in the early 1800s. Ephraim Zalman Margolius was a wealthy businessman. He was a successful businessman. He lived in the city Brod. Brod is a big city in Galicia. The rabbi in Brod is not as famous as the Balabas. The rabbi in Brod at that time was the one who wrote the Sefer on Chulon Lev Aryeh. It's out of style. Used to be everybody quoted Lev Aryeh. Now it's out of style. After Rab Chaim came with his style of learning, so nobody looks on the Lev Aryeh anymore. But it's a good Sefer on Chulon. So Ephraim Zalman Margolius, he got shadows from all over the world. Has Chulon, has many Sforim. There's a lot of Sforim. So he has the Sefer Mate Ephraim, and the Dinim of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur and Sukkot. So everybody, Mishnah Berurah quotes it every other page. Hilchos Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. He has the final word. Then he has the Shari Ephraim. Shari Ephraim is Hilchos Kriyas HaTorah. He writes, he wrote a Sefer on Hilchos Kriyas HaTorah because in the middle of Kriyas HaTorah, the Baal Koreh makes a mistake, or there's a mistake in the Sefer Torah. So the rabbi has to give a fast psak what the din is. So he wrote a Sefer. Everybody should know all the dinim. Okay, the Shari Ephraim. Mishnah Berurah also quotes it in Hilchos Kriyas HaTorah, quotes it every page. So in the Shari Ephraim, in all the later editions, they have a likut of many other achronim on the bottom of the page. So this is in the likut, it doesn't have. On the last pasuk in today's Seder, so they quote that there was a minig by some Hasidim, I forgot which ones, I never saw it. That when the Balkari finishes laning the Sedra, everybody chimes in and says, because the two words la'ash mavo, our Rashi Tevin stuff lakel asher shalis mikol hamasim bayom hashvi. What is it supposed to mean? They don't explain. What does it have to do with this person? I don't know. Merish Pliya. Okay, have a good Shabbos, everybody.